Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, so today we're jumping right into the absolutely mind-boggling story of how just one single, really narrow strip of water practically dictates global power, international economies, and, yeah, even military strategy.
So, let's start with a massive number. $400 million. Believe it or not, that is exactly how much money it costs the global economy every single hour when that enormous quarter-mile-long cargo ship, the Ever Given, got stuck in the Suez Canal. I mean, it wasn't just a bad day for shipping, it was an absolute global heart attack.
Section 1. The quarter-mile traffic jam. Now, you probably remember all those memes of that giant ship wedged sideways in the dirt, right? But look, this wasn't just some funny internet moment. It was actually a really stark reminder of our absolute, terrifying reliance on a highly vulnerable maritime choke point. And honestly, our desperation to bypass this exact choke point leads us to one of the wildest historical facts you're ever going to hear. Get this. Back in the 1960s, the U.S. government actually proposed using exactly 520 nuclear bombs. Their goal? To literally blast a brand new $5 billion alternative canal straight through the Israeli desert to connect the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. No joke.
Section 2. Our complex global machine. To understand why any government would even consider blowing up hundreds of nukes just to make a new waterway, well, we first need to zoom out. We need to look at the mind-bending complexity of the supply chains that make this infrastructure so incredibly vital. Just take the journey of a single iPhone processor, for example. Before it even gets close to your hands, the raw materials are mined in places like Turkey, Chile, and Rwanda. Then they're shipped all the way to a factory in Taiwan to be manufactured. From there, off it goes to the Philippines to be tested, and finally, it's shipped over to China to be integrated into the phone itself. We're talking about an absurd multi-continent journey for just one tiny little component before it's ever put back on a ship to reach a consumer. And almost everything around you passes through this exact massive global system.
But hey, it's not just the products. The physical cargo ships carrying these components, they're just as convoluted. Let's look at the Ever Given's footprint for a second. It was chartered by a Taiwanese company, registered in Panama, owned by a Japanese conglomerate, technically managed by a German company, and crewed by Indian nationals. It's like a giant puzzle. The physical vessels themselves are layered in all these complex international agreements, which really just shows you how deeply entangled the entire global system is.
Section 3. A magnet for conflict. With a system this incredibly valuable, it's no surprise that the waterway controlling it is highly contested. I mean, since its very conception, this unnatural 200-kilometer stretch of water has been a massive battleground for empires. So before the 1860s, the old trade route required sailing all the way around South Africa. The British controlled a port down there, and, well, they absolutely loved their complete monopoly over the global trade flow. But then, French and Egyptian forces dug out the new Suez shortcut, a direct line from the Mediterranean right to the Red Sea, saving literally thousands of kilometers per trip. And just like that, the balance of power shifted overnight. When it was first built in the 1860s, the major powers actually signed treaties, claiming the canal would be this lovely zone of cooperation and total neutrality. But as you might guess, that neutrality completely failed the second the globe descended into the world wars. By World War II, the British actually had to militarily defend it against Hitler and his allies. Then, boom, we hit the 1950s Suez Crisis, and eventually a total, complete closure of the canal between 1967 and 1975. Which brings us back to that 1950s Suez Crisis. Basically, Egypt told the colonial powers they were completely done and just took control of their canal. France, Britain, and Israel responded by sending in paratroopers and fighters to take it back by force, but the U.S. stepped in with a very clear message. You can't just show up wherever you want and just take it over militarily. We don't do that anymore. So the U.S. basically shut down those old-school empire tactics right then and there and sent in UN peacekeepers to settle things down. Section 4. The nuclear alternative. But keeping the peace, yeah, that was exhausting. And this is exactly where we return to the 1960s and how the U.S. sought a very creative, albeit incredibly extreme, workaround to completely bypass all this continuous fighting over the Suez Canal. And here is that jaw-dropping number again, 520. To avoid the absolute political nightmare of the Suez, the United States genuinely, seriously considered detonating 520 nuclear bombs to blast out a 100-kilometer canal of their own right through the desert. The ultimate goal here was creating a strategically valuable alternate route. Now, Israel was actually pretty open to the nuclear weapon idea at first, but by 1967, they opted for a conventional war instead.
With the U.S. backing them from the sidelines, Israel pushed in and took land right up to the edge of the Suez Canal, which pitted them directly against Egypt on the exact opposite bank. And man, this led to a truly unbelievable situation. Because of the intense fighting, the canal became a literal battleground for tanks and troops. They even built bridges right across the water. It was entirely shut down. Remember how everyone panicked when the Ever Given was stuck for just a few days? Well, during the geopolitical wars of the late 60s and 70s, 15 massive cargo ships were trapped mid-transit, and global trade through the canal was disrupted for 8 straight years. 8 literal years. Can you imagine?
Section 5. The Geopolitics of Peace.
Eventually, in 1975, U.S. helicopters actually dragged sleds through the water to clear out all the live explosives, and the canal finally reopened. But the resulting peace? It is far from truly neutral. Today, a staggering 12% of the entire global economy's flow, which includes massive amounts of the world's energy and oil, passes directly through the Suez Canal. Superpowers simply cannot afford to let any single non-democratic regime unilaterally control such a massive chunk of global trade. The stakes are just astronomically high.
Which pretty much explains this number, $1.4 billion. Even today, the U.S. provides Egypt with $1.4 billion in annual military aid. And why? Well, because it buys behind-the-scenes influence and, favors. When a U.S. military vessel arrives at the Suez Canal, they get to completely cut the line and go through quicker than anyone else. So while the waterway might officially belong to Egypt, it's that heavy superpower backing that actually keeps the gears turning.
And all of this really leaves us with one provocative question. What actually happens when this fragile peace goes away? We live in an incredibly interconnected era, relying heavily on armed superpowers to keep these totally vulnerable choke points open. When a ship gets blown off course for a few days, it's not just a traffic jam, it's a mirror. It shows us how deeply connected and, frankly, how deeply vulnerable our entire way of life truly is. So the next time you order something online, maybe ask yourself what it actually took to cross that one vital strip of water. Anyway, thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the systems around you.